to an automatic voice.
Welcome, everybody. We are glad to see you on a Tuesday afternoon. Hope everybody looks still sane. I don't see anybody in a padded cell yet. That's probably where I belong, but
Not yet. Not yet.
Not yet. We're getting a few more people joined in before we get going. If you don't mind just introducing yourself in the chat. I know that we've had some new people join on in new positions this year, and I'm excited to get to work with some of you. So, Marilee, yes, on August 30th, the district reading plans are due. So we are going to let everybody in.
The timeline says the 20th, Melissa.
Yeah, that's what happens when I try to do documents at 1 o'clock in the morning. I hit the 2 instead of the 3. I've already corrected on the website, and I just need to send out a new newsletter. Thanks for checking on it, though.
It scared me.
I was just checking everyone's blood pressure. That's all it was. You all know me by now. You know I do weird things, so just yell at me when something scares you. Don't panic yet.
My blood pressure's high right now. Let's not check it.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Well, I am going to we do have a running agenda that we are starting a new one for those of you that have hung with us from the spring and the summer. That is linked in the footer of this agenda in case you need to go back for some of the notes from this last summer or spring. It's still there, it's still housed there, but just for sake of simplicity, we're going to start a new running document for this year, and I will just keep putting that there in the notes. While we are getting started, who's in my chat room? Apparently I'm having technical issues today. It's not on the computer, it's just me. While we're getting started, just let me introduce myself for those of you that are new. My name is Melissa Algrim. I'm the Director of Reading Sufficiency. And joining me on the call today is Timmy Spangler. She is extremely knowledgeable about the Reading Sufficiency Act, and we often joke that the two of us share a brain. But she has had a position change over the summer. So Timmy, you want to introduce yourself and tell what you're doing these days?
Yeah, I am the project manager for Striving Readers Grant. So I will still get to work with some of you if you have the Striving Readers Grant. Marilee.
And so Timmy's here to help today with just pointing out with the chat and seeing if there's anything else that we need to take care of and helping me keep my head together. I'm going to share my screen so that we can see the document that we want to be talking about today. All right. You should be seeing our running agenda. Can you confirm that for me, Timmy? Uh-oh. Yes, okay. All right, so this afternoon, we are going to talk a little bit about the new guidance that has been released. It was released on Friday along with other grade level return to learn instructional guidance, but we also have a return to learn for foundational literacy and the Reading Sufficiency Act, which we'll look at that in a little more in depth, and hopefully we'll answer several of the questions that I know that you guys have. By the way, I know that if some of you have been sending me emails, I promise you I haven't been ignoring you. I actually took the first vacation I've had since Christmas this last week, and so now I'm digging through the 300 emails that are in my inbox to try to catch up. So if you did email me this last week, a couple of weeks, I apologize, and I am trying to get to those just as quickly as I possibly can. So, but like I said, I think a lot of your questions that I've been seeing so far are going to be answered in this document. We also have some other documents that we're going to talk about today. The timeline, for those of you that just got on, if you looked at the newsletter this morning, there was a typo on the timeline. It's been fixed. but the reading plan is due August 30th, not August 20th. So I apologize for raising any blood pressure. I just hit the wrong key and didn't catch it on time. And then we'll talk about any other reports as well as some resources for virtual learning. Okay. So I want to switch over to our Return to Learn. This is housed on the State Department website. It's a running banner across the top where it says the Return to Learn instructional guidance as opposed to the overall guidance. But the instructional guidance houses this as well as other documents for other grade levels and content areas. We found yesterday, we're coming up, we have put out over 300 pages of guidance this summer between all grade levels and content areas, so we know it's a lot to dig through. But this one focuses primarily on K through 3 literacy and how that works with the Reading Sufficiency Act. I've had one of the questions that's come up often is, are we still doing RSA this year? The answer is yes. Our students still need to be able to learn to read, and we still need to make sure that we are getting to them as quickly as possible. So we want to consider this in cooperation with that other grade level guidance. Those of you that were able to attend the Engage session that we did this summer that talked a little bit more about what K-3 literacy should look like, was that link to that recording is right here, so that's another resource to look for. Okay, and a lot of this it's going to say some of the same things because the research hasn't changed in the last couple of months, so why change what we're asking you to do? So it's important to keep in mind this primary instructional focus for each grade level. We know that in kindergarten, it's very important that we're focused on oral language and word work, working with sounds, alphabetic principle. We're not trying to get them to read novels by the end of kindergarten. We're just trying to get them to talk and use rich language. First through third grade, you'll see a chart here. This is not a prescriptive chart. It is what has been done when they've looked at highly effective classrooms of how they have divided their time. So when you're thinking about 90 minutes in first grade, really 30 to 35 minutes of that is spent on word work, phonemic awareness, phonics, and spelling, with a little less, quite a bit less time for language and reading comprehension. And then we see that switch with third grade with very little time on word work and a lot more time on comprehension, and as we transition over to the reading to learn. As we go through this document, though, you're going to notice with each section there are considerations for blended and distance learning. So one of the questions that has come up is, how do we do 90 minutes of instruction for reading if we are in a virtual situation? It's really important to consider that 90 minutes does not mean 90 minutes face-to-face. We are talking about a couple of lessons, whether it's either synchronous, like what we're doing right now through a Zoom call or a Google Meet, or it could be a couple of recordings, an asynchronous type situation where you have recordings that students are watching, but also the time that they're spent working on activities outside of being online also counts towards that. And we know that students are going to work faster and slower. I have kids myself where I know that I can give them the same task and one will be done in 15 minutes and the other will be done in 3 hours. But thinking along the lines of what would you assign, if they were in your classroom, what would that assignment for a day look like? And go along with those with that. It's best intentions. We're just trying to make sure that they have sufficient time for learning, not that we're trying to make sure that, oh, they only did 85 minutes today and they didn't do 90 minutes. That's not the point. The point is did they have sufficient time for learning? Are we giving them what they need to be able to continue to learn? So you'll see a lot more information on here about the differences, again, between in-person or face-to-face instruction or more traditional instruction and our blended or hybrid. One of the other huge questions that's coming up is about assessment. What do we do, and how do we assess our students? And that I get is a huge concern. We are still, that has not been waived. We are still assessing our students as we continue moving forward. For those of you that have screeners that are able to be given online, we suspended everything in the spring because we were in a crisis situation. We didn't have time to deal with any of that. So we just asked anybody not to worry about assessing in the spring. For those of you that are able to assess online, you are able to assess for your kids from home this fall. That is fine. We get there's going to be issues once in a while with the parent over the shoulder. We're going to have to just do the best we can with it. If you have a student that you really feel like the information is not accurate, you can always ask them to retake that assessment, where you can have them watching that, or say there's something going on, we need you to come into the school if that is acceptable with your district policies and procedures and given CDC guidelines. We have some districts that have said that they are scheduling time for small groups of students to come in and assess at the school for these assessments, just to ensure that validity. And again, that is a decision that your district needs to make given the situation in your area and what you feel that you can safely do. So, but at that time, we do need to assess all of them online. Now, what we are doing is we have technical guidance for all of our screeners that are online. Those are being updated and will be live tonight. I'm just checking the links on the last couple of those. We have asked the vendors to provide any remote guidance, and I have received that from all except one of our vendors, and I'm hoping to get that this afternoon. But they have also done a lot of guidance for how to use their product in a remote learning situation. And so the first thing I would point you to is, what is it that they are saying would work for their situation? The other question I've had from several districts is that if they can use a different screener for their students in a virtual situation than for those that are in brick and mortar. While we would not recommend that practice in a normal situation, in this situation, it's a little bit different. And so we have some districts that have a screener that needs to be given face-to-face. But for those students that are working virtual, they are using a screener that is given in a more online situation. Again, probably not ideal, but it is at least giving us that information that we need and will work for this year. So for those of you that are needing to look into that. Just going on down here on this guidance a little bit, I'm just giving you a quick overview because I know you can dig into this. I'm not going to read 20 pages of guidance to you. We have better things to do with our time. But there are some distance learning considerations for our core reading instruction, thinking about what worked well, what didn't. Mississippi Department of Education has an extensive team that's been able to put out quite a bit of good information. There is a webinar here, it's about an hour long, on K-3 literacy in the time of remote learning that is very helpful in showing what those lessons and videos can look like in an attempt to dissolve the screen and build those relationships with students to help make sure that they're getting what they need for foundational literacy, as well as some additional fluency routines or some explicit instruction, things like that. And just some considerations to think about in cases of distance learning of what could we do with synchronous or asynchronous, what could be recordings or home help or just some offline practice opportunities, all of which add into our time of working with students. Some additional resources for that distance learning is the University of Florida Literacy Institute, or UFLI Virtual Teaching Hub. I'm going to go into this a little bit more in depth here in just a moment because they have a lot of really rich resources that they have spent a lot of time developing, and it is well worth looking at. As well as the Florida Center for Reading Research, which many of us are familiar with, but I always find once in a while somebody who's not heard of that before. They have multiple print activities that can be printed for those students that might need that practice. And that can be just printed and sent home with parents for some different practice opportunities. Working with high frequency words or sight words, I would encourage you to look at the videos that are on Heart Word Magic that can be used for students to learn how to read and decode sight words in a way that is more helpful with how the brain learns to read, as well as some information from the National Center on Improving Literacy. So let me stop there because I have seen a lot of information in the chat. So Timmy, tell me what's going on. You're muted, Timmy.
I gotta unmute myself. Okay, so one question was asking if Exact Path was going to be a screener, and I went ahead and answered for you and said no, not for this year.
It is not. And in looking at Exact Path as of right now, it is intended to be a supplement to core curriculum, not a core curriculum in and of itself. Just in our conversations with them, they know that that foundational literacy is not a strength for Exact Path. They have a lot of good practice activities for comprehension, vocabulary, some of those skills with the older students, but with foundational literacy like phonemic awareness and phonics, that is something that they're working on developing, but it is not there right now. So please be cautious in relying on that for your littles when you're working on foundational literacy skills, that it is going to require, it will not meet all of your needs. It will require a lot of supplementing to ensure students get what they need for that. So.
All right, the next one is, my question about assessing is for the separate virtual school. It is my understanding that the virtual students on plans are still my responsibility. They are on a different curriculum with a different teacher. I never see those students, so how do I make sure they are assessed, and how do they do the portfolio, and who is responsible?
Okay, so as a district, so this is probably a question that you're going to need to ask your administrator if you're a teacher, because it's a pretty big question. As a district, deciding who is it that's going to be that teacher of record and ensure that that assessment is still happening along with all of the requirements of RSA. So like in the case of my daughter, who is going to be at a separate virtual school within her district, she has a teacher of record that is going to have to ensure that all of those rules are being followed. In some other cases, it's going to be the classroom teacher that's having to work with that and probably keeping a checklist or having to schedule some time to meet with that person who's working with the students virtually. If it's the classroom teacher in the brick and mortar school that is ultimately responsible, but you're going to want to make sure that you have that open communication. But it's, again, the district can decide who is going to be ultimately in charge of making sure that assessments are given, that portfolio materials are gathered, especially in third grade, and that they're keeping track of what will need to be met.
Okay, the next thing, Jenny McIntyre is looking for anyone on here that uses MAP and will be virtual. If you are, please reach out to her. The next one, if a student meets the RSA benchmark, but you feel the score is inaccurate, do we just invalidate the score when asking them to retake the screener?
Oh goodness, that's a really good question. In the past, the answer from legal has been that if they reach it once, they reach it. But if we feel that it is an invalid score, I really do think we're going to have a little bit of give there. If it's one of those of they've been scoring here and all of a sudden they leap way up once because we know somebody's over their shoulder. I think we're probably going to have to do something different. And let me put some things in writing for you to be able to have that before the beginning of your benchmark, so that you'll be able to point to something and refer back to if that situation comes up.
Next question, is the IPP taking place of the academic progress plan?
Yeah,
And do all students under 40% get one? Tell them why we're laughing.
yeah, we're laughing. So sometimes when rules and statutes get changed and we have outside eyes looking at things and say, well, this doesn't make sense, we need to change it. And regardless of what we say, if this is what we're used to saying, it gets changed anyway. So yes, it's a new term. I don't care what we call it. I will know what you're talking about. Whether it's a reading plan for students, whether we call it an individualized program of reading instruction or an academic progress plan, that one was a little bit out of my hands. But because it is written in our rules, administrative rules, as an individualized program of reading instruction, our official documentation has to use that term. So that's where that's coming from. Yes, students who score below the 40th percentile or below that grade level target should receive a plan that will help them make some adjustments. There is an exception, and let me get down to that before we go to our next question. So just a little bit on our guidance. I'm going to move down for talking about our screening assessments. We still have a few things here about distance learning. And again, like I said, the vendors are providing specific to their own product what that can or should look like. And I'll come back up to this, but I want to talk about this Tier 1 recovery. So we know that within our multi-tiered systems of support, we have a 3-tiered system. We have Tier 1, which is our core instruction. All students receive core instruction for Tier 1. And then we have those students who are showing that they are at risk for reading difficulty at either Tier 2, which is a less intensive intervention, or Tier 3, which is an intensive intervention for those students who are well below their peers. But for this fall, we know that our students have been out of school for 5 months, and we are going to see some students come back that did not have reading issues whatsoever, all of a sudden are below that benchmark. And so what several national leaders have recommended is that we have a different, or a kind of a mid-level intensity for a Tier 1 recovery from COVID. Where those students who were not on a plan in this last academic year and now are below that benchmark, we're going to go ahead and monitor. We'll include those students in our child count, but yet they may not need a full-on plan. They just might need to get back into the swing of school, whatever school looks like this year, in order to get them caught back up. And if that's the case, we don't need to necessarily do all the paperwork of a plan for those students. So we're going to consider those as a Tier 1 recovery. It is a district decision whether you utilize this level or not, or if you just go ahead and put everyone on a plan that's below the 40th percentile. But what we are saying is that you do have permission to lighten that load a little bit for the fall semester for those students who really surprised you, that did not seem to be having difficulty, all of a sudden have dipped below down to the 25th percentile. If they're below the 25th percentile, that's a pretty big red flag, and we want to make sure that we're getting to those kids right away. But if they're at that 26th to 40th percentile and we're saying, we think we can give them some instruction and get them back on, then don't worry about writing a plan for them for the fall semester. When we do our mid-year benchmarking, if they are still showing that they're below the grade level target, at that point in time, they're going to need a plan, because we don't want to let them go for an entire year until we're directly addressing their needs. So things to consider when utilizing this is, what are your resources? How many of your kids are showing that they are having difficulties? If you have a class of 25 students and 15 of them are showing for flagging that they're below that 40th percentile, that's a lot of kids. It's way too many kids to intervene on. So really, which ones of those can we maybe just set aside and saying, we're going to really focus on giving you good core instruction, but not necessarily write a plan or provide intervention time on top of our core instruction for right now, and see if we can't get them back on. If you have out of 25 students, only 2 that are flagging below and they would qualify for this tier 1 recovery, there's probably resources to give them some extra attention and going ahead and getting that plan going and get them where they need to be before they get too low. So trying to give a little bit of a balance there without letting our kids struggle for too long before we give them the help that they might need. So there's, again, I've tried to give you the summary. It gives you more information in this document about how to utilize this, if you must or must not. Again, it's optional. And what a plan would look like, or when you would need to get a plan going for this level. And then obviously for our tier 2 or tier 3 students, those things have not changed. So there's their tier 2, which is that supplemental instruction where we would give students some supports. Again, it's generally students who are between the 10th and the 25th percentile are considered tier 2. However, that is not a prescriptive. It's a general, it's how that might be applicable. So for students that as a district you feel that they've just now dropped down, that might be a tier 2, or if they've been languishing there for quite some time, they might need more intervention with tier 3. Okay. One other thing to think about too is, I know that's been a concern, is tier 2, the instructional time, additional instructional time. Obviously intervention is in addition to, it does not supplant core instruction. But the tier 2 intervention time is based on the needs of the student as far as what you feel would be appropriate. Research best practice would usually look at about 15 to 30 minutes, about 3 to 5 times a week, depending on the needs of the student at this level. But there's not a statutory requirement for that. So again, that's a district decision. With our recent rules update, tier 3 did see a slight change there. In the past, it was 45 to 60 minutes daily, what was required in addition to that. That 45 to 60 minute part has been removed. So again, it's up to what is best for the student. I am going to say with a strong note of caution that students at the tier 3 level are really our 911 kids and need a significant amount of time, and best practice and research really does point to the 45 to 60 minutes. But if you're needing to look at that a little bit differently, especially considering our situation today, you have that ability to do so. And then again, when we talk about interventions, how can we use those? The National Center for Education Evaluation has really looked at how we evaluate those instructional materials, and then some, again, recommendations for how we can look at tier 2 and tier 3. Okay, so again, on tier 3, we see the frequency. The daily really is still required on tier 3. Those students, if they're that low, they really have to have that daily interaction with those teachers. But the 45 to 60 minutes, while it is strongly recommended, you do have some wiggle room there. I've been asked quite a bit lately is who can provide interventions. Again, there's not a specific person that's specified in statute as to who can provide interventions, because that depends on the resources of the district. It needs to be the people who are best qualified to work with that student. And we certainly want them to be qualified teachers working with our neediest kids. So in some cases, it might be a reading specialist. It could be the Title I teacher with some pullout. It could be students who are in special education with an IEP, and that can certainly align with this as well. English learners, when they're working on acquisition of English language and those skills that are associated with oral language and reading, certainly does overlap with these needs too, and kind of double duty at that time. Speech language pathologist is probably one of your richest resources when it comes to foundational literacy that you have available to you in your building. And I would certainly utilize their expertise. The people I would not utilize for reading interventions would be parent volunteers. While we love our parent volunteers, and especially again this year, that takes on a whole new meaning, but while I'm at it, I'm just going to say it out loud. The parent volunteers are great for ongoing practice, but not for the intervention, the direct instruction that is required for intervention. I've had some that say we have an aide that is really good at it. And I think, again, that depends on the background and the education of the person that you're looking at. I have seen some aides that were not necessarily certified teachers, but have gone through a lot of training for how to work with students with foundational literacy. That is rare, I will say, so don't just automatically start putting your aides in there. But if they've had that training, or they've trained to be able to use a specific program, that's a little bit different, and that's something to consider there to help out. So then we have our individual program of reading instruction, again, also known as an academic progress plan or an APP.
Melissa, there's a question wanting to know if it's okay to go ahead and keep the verbiage of the APP.
Absolutely.
Parents and staff understand that.
Absolutely it is. Do that. Your parents know it. Your staff knows it. Go for it. I just have to, and I'm trying to put on there, also known as an APP, on anything I put out, just so that we see that's the same thing. Yeah. When we're looking at writing APPs or these programs for students in their distance learning, we still have to have that. But some things to consider would be talking with the parent when setting this up. Your parent is a really important part of this, or whoever is going to be overseeing, if they're in like a pandemic pod where they've hired a tutor, but visiting with them of how can we ensure that they would have that. Intervention, while we would love for that to be online and synchronous, is not always going to be able to be that way, and that is okay. There needs to be some time where they're working with that teacher, but it might be that instead of working on a Zoom call daily, it might be that if Timmy's my student I'm working with, I might work with her on Monday and then give her activities to practice on the skill that I just instructed her on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then touch base with her again on Friday. And that might have to be our intervention in this case. So again, not always our ideal, but it's better than not doing anything for her at all of what she's needing. Okay, so that's really kind of the mindset that we're continuing to try to take, is we're trying to keep as close as we can to what we need for our students, knowing that none of it is going to ever be ideal rather than working with our students in person. But we can, that we're really trying to just look at what is the best idea that we can provide. So Sharon, thank you so much for putting the link to this in the chat. That really helps out too. So just we have right there. And Erica, I went in and changed last night. Somebody else had pointed out to me that on the 45 to 60 minutes was still on that APP form, and I fixed that last night as well. So if you go on the website, you'll see the updated version of that as too. So, okay, anything else, Timmy, before I?
There's several on virtual teachers. So what if one person's wanting to know if most virtual schools are bringing in students to be assessed, and then one wants to know, what if the virtual teacher is at another elementary site? Which site does the student on the plan count?
Okay. So as far as what most are doing, I honestly don't know what most are doing. I know that some are bringing kids in and some are testing remotely, but I have not done a survey of all 500 plus districts to figure out exactly who's doing what. But I know that both of those are options that that we have districts looking at and trying to do. As far as, I would look at, where is the student listed on your student information system? If they are listed as a student that is at X elementary school, then the teacher at X elementary school needs to be that working with them. So with whether you're using Power School or whatever student information system that you're using, how is that student listed? Okay. Most schools have not set up a completely separate site code for their virtual schools. I know in the district where my children are in, they are still listed as under their home brick and mortar school, even though they're going to a virtual school. So when that's the case, there is somebody at that school that is having to check in on that and keep that, whether it's somebody actually teaching a class or the counselor in some cases. In some cases, it's an assistant principal who's the person of record for that.
Did the benchmark numbers change from last year, and where can I find those for each grade?
Okay, so let me come over. I'm going to see if I can't stop this share. Come over here and share this document. Let's see, there we go. Okay, so there's technical guidance that is being updated. And like I said, this will be live on our website by this evening. So for some of our screeners, the numbers changed and some they did not. So I sent out communication to each of those vendors in July and asked them to get those to me. I've just now been receiving those. Like I said, I've heard from all but one. So I've updated any of the contact information so that if you are needing to contact them for information, any remote testing guidance that they have provided, you'll find linked on this first page so that you can get to it. This information really hasn't changed as far as the timing or what's required under that. And under required, we have that because that is what the vendor submitted to us when they applied to be on the approved list. That's what they submitted that they would provide to districts in order to fully assess what's required under the Reading Sufficiency Act. And so that's where this is coming from, is from the vendor of saying, if everyone does this, we would fully meet. Any grade level targets, this is the descriptions provided by that vendor. And in bold, you'll see that for this, this is the what we like to call the magic number. If students achieve that end of year third grade benchmark at any time during first or second or third grade, that they are eligible for promotion regardless of their OSTP score. And then we have our 25th and 40th percentile score at the beginning, middle, and in kindergarten through fifth grade. And we've made our magic number score nice and big so that we can see that. That's the number that our students are hoping to get to. You have to understand, these are not mastery assessments, that this is predictive of being able to have the very basic level of foundational literacy. This does not mean that they're a proficient reader right here, that they're going to be ready to read Tolstoy or anything like that. It means that they have the basic ability to do general decoding and very broad comprehension skills. And that's what the Reading Sufficiency Act is focused on. They have sufficient reading ability to keep moving forward in school. So there is a document like this for every one of our screeners that will be there so that you can access that. And let me get back over to that. And you'll find those over here on the RSA Coordinator and Teacher webpage of the OSDE website. And you'll find these right here. They aren't live yet. They will go live this evening because I'm checking the last few links before I put them all up. I don't want to put those up with links that aren't working and suddenly get about 50 more emails that's not working. You'll also find, this was the program of reading instruction that we were talking about, that also the AP, also known as the APP. These are documents that we've provided as tools for your district. You do not have to switch to this document if you already have something you're using. That's perfectly fine. But we wanted to make sure that we had something there. In the past, we've had a separate document for each grade level, which was getting very cumbersome. So we have just made this to where this is applicable for all of our K through 3. And then for, remember, our 4th and 5th grade students who are promoted under either a committee or through an exemption that are still needing assistance, that they would still need that program of reading instruction until they're showing that they are reading sufficiently. And we added just this one part here with the student status, that this is either the first time that we have record that they've been on a plan, because this is something that a lot of districts keep asking, that they've previously had a plan, but they've met targets and then they were removed. So, you know, those students that you put them on a plan at the beginning of the year, and at the end of the year, they're fine, and you come back at the beginning of the year, they're right back on a plan, and they keep hopping on and off and on and off. And that's just important information for a district to have. They've been on a plan before and they've never been able to get those targets, and they're just continuously not doing well. That again is also something really important for districts to be aware of, especially when we might need to think what else is going on that we need to intervene on. Is this maybe a more severe learning issue that we need to talk to a school psychometrist about? Is this that they have been at 5 different elementary schools and they have so many gaps in their learning, or they've missed a lot of school and we need to do some kind of intervention for chronic absenteeism? And then finally, the last one is that this is the 4th or 5th grade student and the situation there. So we have this ability to fill this out electronically so that no one has to touch it, just like this last spring where we did not want to have to pass pieces of paper around. And we have down here, if we were holding fall conferences virtually, if you were in a situation in your district where it is not deemed safe to meet with parents, it is possible that you could check that the conference was held virtually and that you're just typing in who all was there, and you're basically just agreeing or attesting that everybody was there. Or in some cases, we sometimes have the parent or guardian who's unable to attend or will not attend, and that we just mail that update to the parent or guardian, and we move on because sometimes we just cannot get them in the door. This is also on here as a printable PDF in case you want to fill this out by hand as well and don't want to mess with the electronic version. So you have that ability as well. And let's see, also the other question that came up was the timeline and getting that updated. And like we mentioned earlier, you know, I did a big goof and put a typo on here when I sent it out in the email this morning, so I do apologize. But we do have our timeline, the annual district reading plan, which is currently open and due August 30th. Those are coming in pretty quickly. I was just checking this morning. We have quite a few to start looking at. And if you are running into issues on getting any of this done, please let me know as quickly as possible so that we can help you with that. The other question I've been getting is, will we be doing a 3rd grade promotion and retention report this year? Yes, we will. Even though we did not take the OSTP, we still promoted or retained students, and we still have to report how that looked. So this is coming out a little later than normal because we had to do some programming changes to the report, and it took the programmers a while to make those coding changes. But that should be coming out by mid-September at the latest, so that you will have that. It will have all of your 3rd graders from last year preloaded, and you will just click were they promoted or retained, and if they were promoted, how were they promoted. There will also be a video tutorial that comes out with that to go over it in more depth once that becomes available, so that you're not trying to fumble through it. And then
Melissa, you're talking about the BOY, and we do have a question about the BOY.
Okay.
So since we're there, I thought I would chime in. Are virtual program students counted along with face-to-face students on the BOY report?
Yes, because those are still students that are enrolled in public schools, and so this is for all of our public school students. So again, if they are enrolled virtually. How is your district handling that? My guess is that they're probably still enrolled with the brick and mortar school, and that's where their numbers would be reported, would be with that school. So it's going to require an additional layer of communication at the district level to ensure that we're accounting for those students. Okay. So if you have students that are enrolled in the virtual, you know, where would they go, and make sure that, you know, with that, where would they be reported. So like in the case of a district like where my students are, with multiple elementary schools, that's going to have to be on the teacher for the virtual to make sure they know which students to report to which school, that they were tested and that they were either at risk or not at risk when we complete that. And then the same thing with the end of year report. If we are still in this situation in May, that would be the same answer right there. This is the due date of October 1st. If you are in a district that is struggling with meeting that for some reason, let's say your district has to suddenly move to virtual, you were in person, you were moving right along, and all of a sudden you had to move to virtual, please let us know that what's going on and when you think you would be able to get that accomplished, so that we can keep track of that and not penalize you for that if it has to come in a little bit late. We are trying to work with you just as much as we possibly can, but we are going to need some communication about what's happening and when you think would be a reasonable time that you could get that taken care of, so that we can move that on. And the reason why that becomes such a big deal is that this report, along with the reading plan, is tied to our reading sufficiency allocation. We are not able to allocate any funds to anybody in the state until every single site has certified that report, because the allocation is determined by the number of students identified as having a reading deficiency. So we have a pot of money that the legislature has allocated to RSA, and then that total number of students is divided in to come up with a per pupil allocation. So if we have a district that reports in after that computation's been done, it affects the per pupil allocation for everybody. So we can't determine any of that. And then that's the other question I've been getting is, what do we think the allocation will look like this year? I honestly, in years past, I've been able to predict it. I can't this year because the addition of the 5 months of our gap, I think it's just going to look very, very different. So we may have more kids showing up with reading deficiencies and reported on that. Even if they're that tier 1 recovery that we talked about, we would still report them on that beginning of year report, because we're still kind of keeping track of where that went. And I know that's going to be one of the biggest questions our legislators ask this year is, what do those numbers look like compared to last year? They look at that kind of information when determining budgets. So it's really important that we let them know, hey, look, we've got a big need here. You've given us some money, but look how our need grew, and we're going to need to be able to fund what we need for that. So it's really important that we have that as accurate as possible. So. Okay, Timmy, lay it on me.
All right. If a SPED teacher is providing tier 3 for interventions, does this require direct instruction in their written IEP, or is this just part of the MTSS structure? Basically, does the SPED teacher have to change the IEP when they're the ones providing tier 3 intervention?
Well, what's taking place in the special ed room should be the tier 3 intervention. They're not separate. There's not something separate we do for special education and something separate we do for MTSS. This MTSS is the structure within which all of this works. So if I have a second grader, let's say, that is in special education that also has a reading plan, the goals on the reading plan should align with what's on the IEP. The time for IEP and for the reading plan, that's the same. It meets both. Just as long as we're working on reading instruction. That's where it really becomes important that our special education, that we reserve their time for instruction, not for homework help. We taking and finishing work that's done in the classroom, is not the best use of the time, because we have a special education teacher who has that opportunity to work very closely with that student. Now, that being said, does that have to be one-on-one? Again, that depends on the needs of the student and the resources of the district. Sometimes it needs to be 1-on-3. Sometimes it needs to be a little bit larger group. Again, those group sizes are recommended based off of research. But if you have 4 students that are needing that particular intervention and they're at tier 3, then you meet the needs of 4 students and you move on down the road. So if there's no way to separate that into 2 and 2, because sometimes we have limited resources that we have to work in. So, you know, we can tell you what research has shown works best, that will be most helpful for students, but we also know that there's a reality that we work in. And so we just try to get that as close as we possibly can. Okay. What else is going on, Timmy?
Do 4th and 5th grade students need an APP if they're on an IEP?
If they're on an IEP, the thing with the 4th and 5th grade students who are promoted with exemption or committee, the idea is that we don't promote them and just say good luck and move on down the road. They have to have something. If they have that IEP in place, then they have something with reading goals. Okay, as long as we have reading goals. Now, if it's like a speech IEP, that's not what we're talking about. But if they have that IEP, then we're fine, because that is accomplishing the same thing. Where we run into problems is if I have a 4th grade student who doesn't, or a 3rd grade student that's promoted in that way, doesn't have any additional supports, we promote them, and then we say good luck, and then they just continue, they end up dropping out pretty quickly, you know, mentally before they do physically. But if they have supports in place, whether it's through an APP, an IEP, whatever, but we have that legal documentation there, that of record that they're getting some type of intervention in reading, we are accomplishing the same goal.
Do we need to address distance and virtual learning in the reading plan?
You know, really, no. While I know I'm getting that question a lot too, and I'm glad you brought that up, Marilee. There is not really a way to do that in the way the reading plan is written as it is. And to restructure that reading plan this summer would have taken months and months that we just did not have. Especially considering that we're hoping this is a temporary, not permanent situation with dealing with that. So put on your reading plan what your plan is for best instruction for your students. And we get that this is just a very odd year. And if things change, we will work with that. But you don't need to do a separate reading plan or separate notation for this is what we're doing virtually, unless that is helpful for you when communicating with your staff. Because I know a lot of districts will use those reading plans as that's how we're going to help guide our plan. And that's really the intention of it, is to help guide what we're doing as a school and with our staff to make sure that we are meeting all of those requirements and rules, which are intended to help us provide the best education possible for those kiddos. So if it's helpful to add in that extra narrative, absolutely go for it, but it's not an expectation.
I apologize if this has already been discussed. Is the IPRI replacing the APP?
Two terms mean exactly the same thing. It's a long story.
Well, I just wanted to make sure, so because I don't know if that's been answered. So is there an update for the 4th and 5th grade level for RSA requirements?
An update for the 4th and 5th grade level.
So would it just still be the same if they're on a
yeah, if they've been promoted with an exemption or with through committee, we still need to provide additional intervention until they are reading on level according to an approved screener. That's really the short version. And the intervention can be documented either through this APP, IPRI, whatever letters we're calling it today, or through an individualized education program through special education.
If our virtual school has a different curriculum, do we list that in the plan?
If you are able to, that'd be fabulous. But don't think you're going to really be able to, because it only gives you a place for first grade to list that one curriculum option. So unless you're putting in other, in which you can write them both in. Again, you can, and that would certainly be information. I have a feeling you'll probably be asked at some point to fill something out about what are you doing for your virtual, but it's certainly not a requirement right now. And there's limited options out there for virtual. There just really are. You're either doing an online program that's already available, or your teachers are working overtime to try to convert their regular program over to a virtual option. And in which case it just is what it is. We're trying to not make as much work for you and trying to report every little tiny thing.
When I went in to complete the reading plan, the previous requirements of the uninterrupted reading block, as well as the time requirement for each tier, will that be updated?
There's not any way for us to update that plan for this year, because that was opened before the rules were approved. So I would say we'll have to put in there just as much as what will work. So like for tier 3, if you're doing, let's say 40 minutes instead of 45 minutes, just put the 45, because it's a drop down issue. And we could not make that change. I can't go in and change it now that it's open and people are in there. It would cause everybody to have to completely redo their plan. And trust me, we don't want to do that.
No.
We will work on those updates for the next school year. And we're just working within, it's fun. And I know Sharon is on here somewhere and can attest. Anytime you make any kind of changes to reports, you have to do it months and months in advance, because it's not an easy ordeal just changing a few words on a drop-down menu. So we'll have to make those changes for the next year, and for this year we'll work with what we can within that framework.
Do we have to be using the vendor's product to do these assessments?
You must, for this universal screening, you must use one of the 7 approved screeners. That's a non-negotiable. That's written in statute. That cannot be changed without legislative action. As far as any type of diagnostic assessment, there is not an approved list of diagnostic assessments. That is a district decision. And same thing with progress monitoring. So that would be a district decision. It says that we have to monitor the progress of students. It does not list which tool we must use. So it's the screening assessment that is an approved list that you must use one of those 7.
Has NWEA weighed in for MAP yet?
Yes, I have received their stuff. That's one of the ones I'm double checking the links on before I set it up. They've sent a whole bunch of links and videos for remote administration of their assessment. So that will be live tonight.
Can we test before the first actual day of school?
One of it is up to the district as to setting your testing windows. That's a local control decision. I will say it is very important, though, to be aware of when you do that. When we are looking at norms, those are generally based on usually a month, year, or in the year. And when you are well outside of that normed window, it's going to look like you have more students that are not doing well if you do it way early. It's going to look like you have more students that are struggling than what you really do. That's one thing. The other thing is whenever you are screening universally, it's important that you are having within a smaller window, usually a 2-week window is ideal for being able to get all of your data together if you're going to compare it with students to see where they stand. That's one of the things that I know several of us have said, after 2 weeks, data's dead. You always need new data if you're going to look at comparisons at that point. As far as being able to assess prior to school starting, if you've got a few that, right now you're trying to get them in before you're looking at a possible virtual again, that is, again, a district decision, but you just need to make sure that you can get all of your kids in, and how would you make sure that you're assessing them so that you can accurately report out what's going on and make those plans.
Melissa, we have way more questions than we can get to
I
in
know.
the next minute or two, but there's two I think that you can probably do really quickly. STAR Early Literacy and STAR Reading for Screeners. I only see STAR EL on the site. STAR ELL and STAR Reading is not on the IPRI.
So STAR Early Learning is the umbrella term that encompasses both early literacy and STAR Reading. And that, I don't know why Renaissance decided to do that way, because it's extremely confusing. If you see STAR Early Learning, you're looking at both packages, the early literacy and the STAR Reading. And so anytime we've put that on there, we've used that umbrella term of STAR Early Learning, knowing that both are on there. So when you look at the technical guidance, you'll find numbers for both early literacy and STAR Reading. When you look at the reading plan that we have on here, it says STAR Early Learning, which includes both early literacy and STAR Reading, because they come together as a package.
Was there legislation in the past that we have to make sure to include on our own IRPI or APP?
There have not been any updates on that. So anything that we've had in the past, if you've already created one, like I know Kristen has one for Enid, you don't need to make any changes on it. It's all still there. So there were no updates to that in the last couple of years. Okay, so we are going to save this chat and get back to you. And this is going to be what we can use to help form our FAQs, because I'm sure we'll see that guidance document grow based off of the questions you've asked. I will try to get to that as quickly as we possibly can. If there is something that you are just needing an answer to, like now, send me an email and put in the subject line like 911 or I need immediate, so that, because we've got parents waiting or we've got a meeting on the next day that I really need to know, so that I can help get to that as quickly as possible. But otherwise, we've like you said, I love that we've had so many questions. I wish that I could answer every single one of them. You guys are doing a fabulous job. Give yourselves a lot of grace, because that's certainly what we're trying to do as well. We are not trying to hold anyone's feet to the fire. Remember what our whole purpose here is to making sure kids know how to learn how to read. If we can do that, if we're keeping that, then we can work with just about anything. We're not trying to make anyone's lives more miserable, because we know that we're working overtime trying to get this done. So,
and this has been recorded, because several people have asked that I see that it's recording.
Yes, we have recorded this. I will ask them so that we can post this on our website as well, because I have a feeling that there will be people that want to go back to this, of course, and that's just, and things get in the way during the week, and sometimes we can't be here, so we will go from there. All right, well, if there's any other questions that you need to put in the chat, please feel free to do so. Like I said, we will get answers to that just as quickly as we can, so that we can try to keep moving as much as we possibly can. I know it's tough, and you guys are doing a fabulous job, and thank you for all of the work that you're doing. I know we all need a great big teacher party when all this is over, just to decompress for a while. So,
Melissa, don't forget to save the chat.
I will absolutely do that. Thank you. And yeah, Leanne, we will make sure that we get those questions answered. But like I said, if there's something you're needing an answer to pretty quickly, just shoot me an email and let me know in the subject line what's going on so that I can make sure that I prioritize that for you. Or Leanne, I think you have my cell phone number. Just give me a call. Where will we find the recording? I will put this on our RSA page so that you can find that easily. And I will also send out a link on the RSA newsletter so that you can access it that way as well. All right, friends. It's Tuesday afternoon. Go well. Hope everything's going all right for you. And yes, Leanne, I had a great time. Thank you. All right. See people on bus duty already. Oh my goodness. Yeah, no, I've had a lot of questions with NWEA.